That's wonderful. And I hope it will be really, really helpful. I'll speak for a lot of different groups, but usually they're directly faith-based. And so what I want to talk about is really about change, and it's about life change, gets deeply into habit. I think it would relate to everybody no matter what, and it gets into change on both the individual side as well as on the organizational side. But what I'd like to do, if you guys are up for it, is to ask you to start by taking a minute and pair up with one other person and think about habits. I'm going to talk more about habits because our lives are mostly governed by habits. Think about either one habit in your life that you would like to get rid of. That's a relatively safe, non-scandalous thing to talk about. Or what's a habit that you would like to cultivate that is kind of calling your name, where you think, yep, I would love to have that be a part of my life. So just to make this quite concrete, take a moment to think about that. Could be something that's very work related, could be something where you think this would be a great habit for all of us to share together, or it could be something real personal, but that'll help get it kind of out of the abstract into the real life. Can this be valuable and actually make change category? So take a moment, and if you would, everybody just pair up, talk to one other person or two if you need to. Take about 60 seconds right now and just name one habit that you think, yep, that'd be something where I'd like some change. Okay, take a shot at that. Okay. Can I move forward now, or do you guys need another 30 seconds?
Hey, John, I'm gonna go ahead and mute us in between these questions, just so it's not loud and overpowering on your end. So, yeah, there's a lot of us in this one little space, so I'm just gonna mute us in between you talking, just so we can all hear you fully clearly, okay?
Okay. Yeah, I was trying to monitor, and it looked like there was lots of talking going on, but I couldn't hear anything. So if it's okay for me to go forward, just do thumbs up right now. Okay, then I will do that. And hopefully, at least at some point, there could be some time for questions or interaction or conversation. So if you have questions or thoughts that you want to talk about, you can jot them as we go along. And we can maybe figure out some way how to make space for that. Somebody could raise their hand up real high, and I could probably see that. What I want to start talking about is a kind of model for change. And this actually comes from a writer, guy that was actually a philosopher named Dallas Willard. He is the smartest guy I have ever known. I used to say to Dallas, I would never get into an argument with him because I was afraid he would prove I don't exist. He wrote a lot about change. And a lot of that has to do with habits. I don't know what the word habit conjures up for you. Often it can sound kind of rote and routine and not real life-giving. My wife, Nancy, hates the word habits, so we go back and forth on that all the time. I'm thinking about habits now at a very broad level. Um, Habits are one of the greatest inventions of all time. If you think about when you were growing up, or when you look at a little kid, um, initially, everything they do requires conscious, focused attention. So it's very hard for them to dress themselves. It's very hard for them to walk. It's very hard for them to feed themselves. But the way that we're made is we outsource all kinds of behaviors to our bodies. And that happens through the process of habit. And we'll get into a little bit about how it is that habits get formed. But thank God for habits. If it were not for habits, when you drive a car, it would always require as much focused attention as it did when you were 16 years old first learning. But what happens is eventually we're able to basically outsource all kinds of behavior to our bodies so that our mind can think about other things. So habits are wonderful. Life would be impossible without habits. Most of our behavior actually is a result of habit. It's not stuff that we're actually thinking about. When you're typing away on a keyboard at a computer, you're able to think about what you want to say because you no longer have to try to remember where all of those keys are and what they are. But of course, one of our problems is we get into the wrong kinds of habits. And so learning how do we change habits is a fundamental part of the change process. Here is what Dallas wrote about how change happens. And I'm not doing screen share. I'm not tech savvy at all. So I have to do this, but I'm trying to see when this comes into focus. This is really funny. Let me see if I'm going to go back to my screen. Can anybody?
Sir, too much information right now. Sorry. I love you.
Okay.
Yes.
I have just unblurred my background. So this is a day of technical triumph for me. And this is the little model that Dallas would talk about. All change, and this would be true for your work together, for the work of an organization as well as individual life. All change involves these three components. It involves a vision, it involves intention, that is a decision, where I decide to do something. And then it also requires certain methods or means if I'm going to change. So always a vision for who I might be or what I might do, and then a decision, I will actually move forward with this, but also there has to be wise means or methods. So for example, when it comes to learning a language, there has to be a vision. How would my life be different if I was able to speak and read this language? The sign of an effective vision is that it will elicit unforced desire. So a vision that can lead to change will cause me to say, I really want that. And sometimes, for example, if the vision is around getting into shape, people will put a picture up on a refrigerator. There's a refrigerator behind me of what I might look like if I got into really good shape, just as a way of reminding me, yes, I really want that. That's vision. And then intention involves a decision that I make. I will do this. I will move forward and I will take on whatever I need to take on in order to see this change in my life. Intention means I'm not looking at myself as a pawn or as somebody to whom things happen. We often drift into do that and kind of, wonder, will I ever learn a language, or will I ever get in shape, or will I ever acquire this ability, as opposed to simply saying, yes, I've decided that I will do this. Decision is real key here. It's interesting. We will sometimes say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. We never say the road to hell is paved with good decisions. So an intention has to turn into a decision where I make a commitment to do this. But then also, I have to have wise means or wise methods. So, for example, when it comes to learning a language, and we think about the need for vision, intention, or method, if you were to ask, where are more useful, effective methods readily available for people to learn a new language in America or in China? Where is it easier to take classes, to get tapes, seminars, books, Rosetta Stone, whatever? Where is it easier to find good methods to learn a new language, in America or China? The answer is it's a lot easier and cheaper to find great methods, classes, seminars in America than it is in China. But if you were to ask, where are more people learning a new language, America or China? The answer would be in China, particularly people learning how to speak English. What's the difference? And the difference is vision. In China, there will be millions and millions of people who will say, if I can learn a new language, and generally it's English, if I can learn to speak that language, doors will be opened up to me. Financial doors, educational doors, vocational doors. So the vision that leads to the desire to learn a new language tends to burn much brighter in China than it does in US. And very often, where there is a vision, people will work really hard to find a method. But the alternative is not true. Just because there's lots of methods available, they're not likely to be helpful unless I have a burning vision. Where there is a very strong vision to want to change, but a lack of effective means or method, then people experience frustration. And they will hear, oh, it would be wonderful to learn this or to grow spiritually or to be different physically or so, but they don't know, how do I actually do this? On the other hand, if there's a lot of method that's made available and a lot of haranguing people, you ought to make a commitment, you ought to decide, but there's not an effective vision, then you tend to have a lot of bureaucracy or a lot of legalism or a very mechanical approach to life. So for effective change in any place, and you might think about this also with the people that you work with, you want to change the world, you want to lift people out of poverty. Part of what that means for the folks that you're aiming at then is they have to have a vision, and you got to help them know this is how we can change the world. And then there's a call to intention. Will you actually take action? And then there have to be wise, effective means or methods. Another example of this would be the 12 steps. If you know the 12 steps in Alcoholics Anonymous and other places, the 12 steps themselves actually involve the vision. The first 2 steps of the 12 steps are, we admitted that we were powerless over alcohol and our lives had become unmanageable. So that's the negative side of that vision. If I keep going in this direction, I am powerless and my life will be a mess. And then the second step is came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So that's the positive side of that vision. I could be restored to sanity. I could enter into a life that would be something other than the hell and death that I'm living right now. So the first 2 steps are vision. The second step is intention. Made the decision to turn our lives and wills over to the care of God as we understood it. So that's intention. And then steps 4 and following took a fearless and searching moral inventory, confessed to God, ourselves, and one other person the exact nature of our wrongs. The rest of the steps are all about means or method. So Dallas would say, and I just think it's right, in any sphere of life, significant change will involve vision, intention, and means or method. And I'll say another word about that idea of method. And this, again, I learned from Dallas, but it's just general wisdom about life. One of the most important distinctions that I've ever heard is there's a massive difference between trying to do something versus training to do something. There is a huge difference between trying to change versus training to change. And you'll see this sometimes in the Bible, for example, lots of other places. Ancient Greeks would talk about this, but Paul says one time that when people are running a race and they want to win, they enter into strict training. And then he says, when it comes to kind of character or spiritual life, we do the same thing. We enter in the training. So there's a big difference between training and trying. To get at that, let's just start with change at the physical level. Use the metaphor that Paul uses here of a race. And I'll put this in the form of a question and get close so I can see you in that little tiny rectangle. How many of you today could go out right now and run, not walk, but run every single step of a marathon right now today if we were to stop? Raise your hands. I don't see too many hands being raised there. Second form of this question, I see one right there. Good for you. Second form of the question, how many of you could go out right now today and run, not walk, every step of a marathon if you were to try really, really, really hard? All right. Not many more hands raised as far as I can see. Now, my guess is that probably if you really wanted to, most of you would be able to go out eventually and run a marathon. What would you have to do first? You would have to train. I cannot hear you, but I'm trusting that you're all saying train. What does it mean to train? Yep. To train means I arrange my life around those activities through which I gain the ability to do what I cannot now do by direct effort. I will say that again. To train means I arrange my life around those activities through which I receive the power to be able to do what I cannot now do by direct effort. Arrange my life around activities through which I get power to do what I cannot do by today. And as a general rule, change, transformation in any significant area of life involves training, not just trying. So that's true athletically. That's true when it comes to learning a language. That's the method part. I get a vision for this, but then I don't just intend or decide. I don't just try really, really hard. I will train. I will review the alphabet of that language, and I will review the vocabulary, and I might take a class, and I might listen to language tapes, and I might travel to that country and speak that language. I will enter into training. It's true if I want to learn how to play the piano or play an instrument. I will get a teacher. I will get books about that. I will practice scales over and over again and get pieces. And it's true in gaining skills in business, learning how do I lead a team. I will get a mentor. I will review what I do. I will read books on leadership practices. I'll get feedback from other people on a regular basis about how I'm doing that. I will try to form a team myself. And it's true for character qualities. So when I moved out to the Bay Area 20 years ago, I met a guy named Meyer Friedman. Meyer Friedman was the cardiologist who coined the phrase type A behavior, if you're familiar with that. And his primary mission was to deal with people that suffered from what he called hurry sickness. So maybe a habit that you want to deal with is you're hurried all the time and you're not patient and you want to grow more patient. And what a lot of people think is, well, I got to try harder to be more patient. But trying harder does not work any better with patience than it does with running a marathon. So I have to find ways to arrange my life around practices that can enable me to become a more patient person. And Meyer Friedman would actually give assignments out to his patients, like for a month, deliberately drive in the slow lane. That'll kill you. Or when you go to the grocery store, if you suffer from hurry sickness, you'll know, because if you suffer from hurry sickness and you're at the grocery store, you will find yourself, if there's two checkout lines, looking at both lines and counting how many people are in each line, multiplied by how many items in each cart, so that you can get in the quickest line. And if you're really sick, not only do you do that, but if you get in line A, you keep track of the person who would have been you in line B. And if they get out of the line sooner than you do, you're depressed the rest of the day because you've lost the waiting gun. So Meyer Friedman would say, if you want to train for patience, then deliberately get in the longest line. And maybe let somebody else get into the line in front of you. And when you're at the stoplight, deliberately get in the lane with the most cars at the stoplight. It'd probably make you get to where you're ending up 30 seconds later. How god awful that will be. If you have a problem with eating for the next month, I mean, you have a problem with hurry for the next month while you eat, chew. So practices like that become ways that we train for patience or for joy. You know, lack of joy, joylessness, anhedonia, inability to experience pleasure is a huge problem in our day. So what do? And some people think, well, today I'll just try really hard to be a joyful person. And that does not work any better than trying really hard to run a marathon works. And the reason for that, and a lot of people kind of don't understand, it has to do with what the will, our ability to choose or intend or decide, is good at and what it's bad at. Willpower is very good at making big commitments or big decisions, like I will choose to go to this school, or I will choose to work at this company, or I will choose to get married, or I will choose to move here. It's very good at making big whole life commitments. It is very bad at overriding the attitudes that get embedded in our bodies. And again, this is because mostly we run on habit, and habit eats willpower for breakfast. Habit is just embedded in our synapses. And so the idea that I can make a decision that is going to override habits is a fundamental misunderstanding of the way that the body works and the way that habit works and the way that willpower works. So if you want to become a more joyful person, you may want to train for joy. And so then you would actually engage in activities that bring you delight. Maybe one day a week, you make your joy day, and you wear clothes you love to wear. You listen to music that you love to hear. You eat food that you love to eat. You hang out with people who bring joy to you, because there are other people in your life who do not bring you joy, who take joy away from you. They are like great black holes of joy-sucking negative energy. And you say to them, I cannot be with you today. This is my joy day. I will be with you tomorrow. How do you arrange your life around training for joy? And this is where the idea of disciplines come in. Disciplines are a core part of transformation in any way. I think I mentioned ahead of time that book by Scott Peck, The Road Less Traveled, where he talks about disciplines. This is simply another way of talking about how do I arrange my life around transformation, or around change? What are the methods that help me move towards that? And discipline sounds like a really off-putting word. Who wants to be disciplined when they're a kid? it sounds kind of miserable. So I get that. Choose another word if you want, talk about practices or habits or whatever. But the fundamental dynamic is one that we can never escape. And it simply has to do with the nature of human life as embodied. And so if you watch somebody who wants to be a great football player or a great surfer or a great musician, or a great scholar or a great leader or a great philanthropist or a great parent, then they will find a way to living that can help them be transformed. So it's always good to remember too, disciplines are just a means to an end. They're not an end in themselves. So a disciplined person is not somebody who does a lot of disciplines. A disciplined person is somebody who is able to do what needs to be done in the right way, at the right time, for the right reason. And the reason that we practice disciplines, if we do in any field, from music to sports to character growth, is simply so that we will be free to do the right thing in the moment. Disciplines are always about freedom. A disciplined musician is free to play something that other people couldn't. Disciplined center fielder can make a catch, or a basketball player can make a free throw. A person who is verbally disciplined is able to say the right thing in the right moment and does not say the wrong thing at the wrong moment. So that brings us to habits. And I'll talk a little bit about the cultivation of habit. And then we can maybe have a little bit of conversation. Lots of stuff has been written about habit over the last couple of years. Again, because habits are fundamental to the way that we live, and most of our life is lived by habit. One of them is a book by James Clear that has sold a ton, and it's called Atomic Habits. And he writes in there about when we think about cultivating habits, it's helpful to aim at the right level of change. And if you can see this, he talks about 3 different levels. We can try to change our outcomes. We can aim at the level of outcome, or we can aim at the level of processes. But the most fundamental level to aim at is our identity. Who is it that I'm becoming? Or as a company, who is it that we are becoming? And that relates to the vision. The deepest level of vision is, what person do I want to be? Or for you all together, what kind of community do we want to become? A great leader named Max Dupree said that's about the most important question that a community or an organization can ask. Who do we want to become? Because really we want what we do to flow out of who we become. And so James Clear writes, when it comes to habits, that we could think about 3 levels at which change can occur. The first layer is changing my outcomes. And that has to do with results. Losing weight, publishing a book, winning a championship. Most of the goals that people set, he says, are really aimed at that level. The second layer is changing your process, changing habits, changing systems, implement a new routine at the gym, declutter your desk for better workflow, form a better meditation practice, which, by the way, if you hate to meditate, most people hate to meditate. I've been doing a lot of research in this area. It turns out actually that even most Buddhists do not meditate. So if you don't like to meditate, don't beat yourself up over it. The third and deepest level, he says, is changing your identity. Changing your beliefs, your worldview, your self-images, your judgments. Outcomes are about what you get. Processes are about what you do. Identity is about what you believe and who you are. And that's where changing at the level of my identity becomes something that is really sustainable. So the true transformation is really not about outcome change, it's about identity change. the goal is not to read a book, it's to become a reader. Because if the goal is just to read a book, when I finish the book, I'm done. But if it's to become a reader, I'm never done. The goal is not to run a marathon. The goal is to become a runner. Because if I become a runner, my life becomes fundamentally different. The goal is not to learn an instrument. The goal is to become a musician. And then there's a sustainability. And again, as long as it's attached to the vision, there's a beauty to how change can work. All right, now let's talk a bit more about habits in particular, and what a habit is and how a habit can be changed. So 2 other books I'll mention. One is by a Stanford writer, B.J. Fogg, F-O-G-G, and it's called Tiny Habits. And he writes about how our behavior, what we do, is always a function of this little acronym, MAP. M is for motivation, and A is for ability, and P is for prompt or cue. And always when I find myself doing something, these 3 dynamics will be at work. My motivation to do something could be high or it could be low. I really want to, I don't want to very much. He says one of our problems is when we try to change, we tend to lean too much on motivation and try to psych ourselves up into thinking, I really want to become a reader, or I really want to get in good shape. But actually, motivation just fluctuates a ton. And in the moment, I may really want something, but half an hour from now, I may not want it at all. So this tends to be a pretty weak reed to lean on. But it is one of the dynamics. And then a second dynamic is my ability to do something. Is it pretty hard to do, or is it pretty easy to do? And then the third element is a prompt or a cue. It's that little reminder that tells me do it or don't do it. And here's the key dynamic that he talks about when we think about habit change is this curve here, this action line is, am I actually likely to engage in this behavior or not? And, you know, when you stop and think about it, the easier it is to do something and the higher my motivation is, then when that cue or prompt comes, the more likely I am to take action. On the other hand, the less motivated I am and the harder the behavior thing is to do, then that's when a prompt or a cue will probably fail. I probably don't want to do that. So you might use this to tinker with something you want to change. For example, a lot of people, when they first wake up in the morning, the first thing they do is reach for their phone, and then they engage in what is sometimes called doom scrolling. I just open it up and I start looking at all the bad things that are going on in the world, or the emails that I have and they make me feel overwhelmed and behind. And the reason that I do that is it's super easy. My phone is right there, and my motivation to do it is pretty high. We tend to want to outsource our attention because our minds, when they're not aided, tend to think about things that are frightening or make us anxious, or we get bored. And so it's just easy to combat that by looking at a screen. And that's one of the reasons why our capacity to manage our attention, our focus, tends to be really weak in our day, because we can outsource it so much. So one possibility would be just take your phone and put it in the other room when you go to sleep. And that makes the ability to doom scroll when I first wake up in the morning harder, because I got to get out of bed. And so I'll just look for, if that's a habit that I want to break, how might I make it harder and less appealing to me so that I'm less likely to do it. But this little kind of dynamic of being aware, is my motivation to do something high or low? Is it hard or easy to do? and that will determine whether a prompt will tend to do it or not. You may notice with restaurants nowadays, for example, with tipping behavior, very often what happens is you go to a screen and there's somebody right there with the screen looking at you, and then you will see, do you want to give a tip? So it's now very easy to do because it's right there on that screen. And in fact, there's somebody watching you do it. So your motivation is likely to go up. So it's easier and easier to do, and they're making your motivation get higher and higher to it. So it's more and more likely that it's going to happen. And again, you might be thinking about that with the folks that you work with, where you want to encourage people to donate. So the easier it is for them to do it, and the higher their motivation is, the higher you're able to make that motivation for them, the more likely it is to have happen. And then I'll mention one other really important part of kind of habit change. This is from one more book I mentioned. It's by a guy named Charles Duhigg, and it's called The Power of Habit. And this came out, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago, The Power of Habit. Terrific book. He talks about what he calls a habit loop, which is very simple. And it works like this. There will be a cue, and then there is my ritual, the response that I engage in when I see that cue, and then there's the reward that I experience. So there's the cue. Pavlov's dogs, initially it was the food coming out, that was the cue, and then they would start to salivate, they could eat, and that was the reward. Eventually, Pavlov discovered, and this was a huge thing, that he could pair the food with the bell and then make the bell ring before the food got out, and the dogs would begin to salivate when they just heard the bell. So habit loops are very powerful. One of the fundamental realities of habits is those neural pathways of habits never disappear in our bodies. And that's one of the reasons why if someone has an addiction problem, something like the 12 steps is going to be needed, because those old neural pathways don't go away. It's kind of like when tires are running in a rut, and that rut's always there. Those neural pathways are there in our minds. So the golden rule of habits is don't try to stop a habit, replace a habit. Old habits are not going to die. They're not going to fade away. So what I want to do is to try to replace an old habit with a new habit. And the simplest way to do this is if you take a habit that you'd like to change now, and I did this for many, many decades. I would pick at my fingernails, and periodically I would try to stop at it, was never able to do it very well. And Charles Duhigg's book actually helped me to do that in a pretty simple way. The idea here is if you have a habit that you want to break, just take 2 weeks and notice anytime you engage in that habit, when you engage in the routine, what's the prompt, what's the cue that triggers it? And jot it down, just write it down. So I would look at when were those moments that I was picking at my fingernails, and I noticed there were 2 cues, and one of them either as I was feeling stressful, I was anxious about something, or I was bored. And so this behavior, when I would engage in it, would make me feel a little relief from stress. It was kind of self-comfort. So that got real clear. And then the other question to ask is, what's an alternative behavior that you can engage in that would give you that same reward? For me, it was comfort. And again, this is embarrassingly simple, but it worked for me. What I thought was, I'm always wearing clothes, and clothes are usually kind of soft and comfortable. So I could just, when I have that sense of stress or boredom, I could just use my fingers and touch my shirt or my pants, and then I would get that same sense of physical sensation of comfort that I used to get by doing this. And so just something that simple, learning what is it that prompts this behavior that I want to change? What's the reward that that behavior brings? And how could I substitute a different behavior that could bring about that same reward? That becomes a real simple but quite effective way to change behavior. I'll mention one other way to go after habit change that a number of folks write about, and it's sometimes called habit stacking. And the idea here is one of the simplest ways to form a new habit is take something that you already do anyhow, and let that be the prompt or cue for the new behavior that you want, and then give it a little reward. And the main thing is to make it as simple as possible. So habit stacking is take something you already do automatically and then pair it with, associate it with some new behavior that would be constructive that you want to engage in, and then give it a little reward each time. And the main thing with habit, and this is, it sounds insignificant, but it's not. The main thing with habit is start really small so that you actually do it. The biggest problem with habit formation is we all tend to try to make the habit too big, and then it never gets a chance to form. The thing that makes a habit get formed, because again, it's habit, isn't our motivation or intention or how much we value it. It's feeling good when you do it. It's just feeling good when you do it. So 2 examples of this one. When I get up in the morning, I've kind of adapted something from BJ Fogg on this one. When I get up in the morning, when I get out of bed, my feet hit the ground. So that has become an anchor now for a first thought of the day. And BJ's suggestion was just to say out loud, this is going to be a great day. And for me, since I'm a person of faith, my first thought is when my feet hit the ground to say, this is the day that the Lord has made, I will rejoice and be glad in it. And to let that be the first thought of the day, as opposed to doom scrolling my phone, is just a much better way to start the day. So the anchor is my feet hit the ground. The new behavior is just this real simple thought. And then after I say it, I smile and sometimes raise my hands up like this. And again, I know that sounds goofy, but if you try this, you will discover when you remember to smile, that's what makes your body cause it to stick as a habit. It's just a little celebration and it feels good. Now, sometimes if it's a hard day, if there are really difficult things going on in my life, then I will allow myself to say one more word. This is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it somehow. That can sound funny. It's a true story. I was just in the Midwest and spoke at a church, and a guy came up to me and he had heard me talk about this. And he's a terrific person of faith. His adult son committed suicide recently. And he said for him to be able to say when he gets up in the morning, this is the day the Lord has made, I will rejoice and be glad in it somehow. You know, that word enabled him to hold on to that thought and hope in a way that otherwise that statement would have been way too glib. So that dimension of habit formation, have an anchor, something that you already do. You already do that. You already brush your teeth. You already get dressed. You already have a sip of coffee. All kinds of stuff that you ought to do. So then a real simple behavior. Another one that I've started doing is I'm a P on the Myers-Briggs, so I like spontaneity. I'm not detailed. I'm not an organization type person. I like to do what feels good in the moment. I like options. And my desk can get real cluttered. I also love to read, love to have all kinds of stuff around. but I'd like to have a neat desk. So for me, the prompt was when I leave my office at the end of my workday, I'm going to do that anyway. And the behavior is put away one book. Put away one book. I've tried before to say I'm going to have a clean office, and that never lasts. But what I found was when I just have that real simple, when I leave my office, before I leave, I will put away one book and smile. And what I find is when I do that, just the act of doing that gives me momentum to put away other stuff as well. And because I'm putting away that one book on a daily basis, the other stuff just follows. And so my office has become a whole lot cleaner and neater now than it ever used to be. But the key to it is just the simplicity, real small. Just put away one book and then celebrate. And habits tend to gain momentum. And as long as I'm willing to force myself to keep it small and celebrate each time, it will grow in a way that if the habit is too big, have a clean office, it never would. So I've talked way longer than I planned on it, but I will stop at this point, and that we may be all done. You may be like behind in work, but if there's any thoughts, questions, comments, conversation, I'd be real glad.
Who has questions for John today? Raise your hand.
I got one for you, John.
Yeah.
Is that an aura ring you're wearing?
It is an aura ring. I got this a while ago just to help me track sleep, and now they've got a new kind that tracks exercise. And I am not a good sleeper, so I got it and I like it a lot. Yes, you are very observant.
So, if you're not a good sleeper, though, has that helped you have better sleep?
Yeah, it's interesting just monitoring something. Oh, this is really interesting. Kind of a fun question. Personally and organizationally, as you guys think about the organization, often just monitoring behavior causes us to change when we would not have guessed it. So it's not like it's giving me a lot of brand new information about sleep, but it makes me more aware of kind of sleep habits, having a regular bedtime. What's the last thought that I think while I sleep, listening to the same thing at night. And so similarly to how folks used to say, when you weigh yourself, you ought to only do it once a week because your weight fluctuates too much. What they discovered was people who weigh themselves every day do a better job with that. Or people who write stuff down in a food journal ended up doing better with their diet. And this actually led to something that Charles Duhigg talked about, which is our life is a mass of habits. However, certain habits have a disproportionate impact on our lives, and Duhigg calls those keystone habits. And he tells the story here of a woman who had gone through a lot of trauma in her personal life, and so her financial life, her relational life, her vocational life, substance use, everything was just a mess. And the starting place for her was she stopped smoking, and that one change of habit ended up leading to all kinds of positive changes in her life. There's another chapter in here which is really fascinating if you ever want to look through it, on the company Alcoa. And back, I don't know, 20 years ago or so, they got a new CEO, Paul O'Neill, and when he came to give his initial speech to the shareholders and everything, the only thing he talked about was accidents and safety, and that we're going to bring accidents down to zero. And it was such a bizarre talk. Like, he actually started by telling everybody who was in the room, you will notice the exits are clearly marked. If there is a fire or an emergency, then you can leave the room. And they thought, this guy's lost his mind. And a number of investors, got on the phone to their people and said, whatever you do, sell Alcoa. And it became one of the great success stories. But what he discovered was, by embracing and organizing around that one habit of safety, and we're going to eliminate accidents, it shifted the way that people connected with each other. It shifted communication processes. It shifted truth telling, shifted all kinds of stuff so that Alcoa's performance in every regard went way up, but it was because they had chosen one keystone habit. So, it could be sleep with an Oura Wing, could be personal, could be for you guys as an organization to think together, what's the keystone habit that if we could change that one would really have the biggest impact all around us. I thought that was fascinating. So great question. Thanks for asking.
Thanks for answering.
Anyone else have any questions for John? John, you went over 3 methods today, and I just wanted to ask, of those 3 methods, I've read a couple of those books, which was most impactful for your life, and which do you use most in your everyday?
I would say the habit stacking one, taking something that's already in my life, and then finding, a simple, small next step that would be positive and celebrating that. It's so doable, and it has a way of often kind of growing on its own. So I think that's the one that's helped me the most.
Awesome. Any more questions? No? Okay, we do have a few guests that joined us virtually today. So Heather and Bruce, thank you for joining us. And finally, there you are, Heather. Heather, did you have any questions for John?
I just wanted to thank John. I just wanted to express my gratitude for all that I've learned from him over the years. I'm currently going through Life Work Leadership, and we're doing your Soul Keeping series,
Oh, cool.
which is just fantastic. And I appreciate so much Wayne and the team inviting me to listen in today. This was really, really good material. I am curious about what you're passionate about in your life right now. Like what are you really, you mentioned studying meditation. Is there anything else that you're really leaning into?
Yeah, I love talking about faith and character change. So I actually do a kind of daily teaching video. It's at becomenew.com, and it'll be about 10 or 12 minutes. Just how can you connect to faith? How can you change? How can you experience transformation in your life? That's those kind of questions around how do we change? Where does God fit in? That's always felt to me like the key stuff. So it's just kind of turned into a really cool online community. I didn't know if it would or not, but it has. So that's the main thing I'm doing these days.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. I'll tune into that.
Yeah.
Thank you, LC team. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. Hey, Heather, why don't you just introduce yourself, what you do? And John, just so you know, Heather's a client of ours with our marketing company. She's got a pretty unique story. And maybe, Heather, you just introduce everybody in the team as well as John, who you are, what you do at One Person, that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. So One Purse is a nonprofit organization that empowers survivors of sex trafficking. And we do that through education and employment. So what we've come to understand about that space is that survivors are highly vulnerable to re-exploitation if we don't help them to heal and establish economic stability. And so that's kind of our specific place on the continuum of care, is providing scholarships, and we have a work therapy employment program for them. So, and we're thrilled to have the LC team working alongside of us and helping us sharpen our marketing and our place in the community so that more people will know about our work.
That's wonderful.
And Heather, just so you know, Kenan is here as well, which is working on us with our executive team at Funds.org on strategic planning and vision casting and stuff like that. He just looked at me and says, "Didn't I introduce you to Heather?" I'm like, "Yeah, you did."
He did. Hey, Kenan, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Full circle.
Awesome. Well, John, thank you so much. I'll send a follow-up email afterwards, but we really appreciate your book recommendations and all the wisdom and insightful thoughts that you imparted on us today. So thank you for joining us and for meeting our team.
Thanks, you guys. Love what you're doing. It's really good to see all of you. So it's an honor for me. Thank you.
Thank you, man.
Thank
Thank you, John. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.